Hello everybody. I'd like to continue now with our techniques of fusion and duality. And this will be the second program. We close with a consideration of illumination, imagination, and inspiration. So this technique of fusion, following upon the technique of integration, will bring illumination through the evocation of the will or first aspect of divinity, even though it is a second aspect effect. It will bring imagination through the evocation of love and the second aspect or of sentient response to the world to the world's soul in all forms. So imagination in this case will reveal relationship. And the imagination can be used as an instrument of love, and it will reveal love to the one who imagines. This is related to the second aspect of divinity, but it is a third-ray quality, we're told. Imagination is a form-building quality, related in this case to the third ray. So it's a second ray process with a third ray effect, and the first is a first ray process with a second ray effect. And then this technique of fusion will bring inspiration through the evocation of the intelligence, the third aspect. But inspiration is a first ray effect, even though the method begins with a third ray cause. So he will say more about this, and we will attempt to develop this idea. All right. Yes, I think, okay. So, if we study, he says, this triplicity with care, we shall see how the process outlined brings the higher aspect of the personal self, the mind, to the lowest point of contact and into control of the physical body. We shall see how it brings the soul into conscious control of the astral, desire sentient body, and it also brings the will aspect, the highest aspect of divinity, into control of the mind. So what do we have here? We have the superimposition of the triad, upon the lower triad. Superimposition of the spiritual triad upon the lower triad. And what I'm going to do, I see I don't have my... right. What I'll do here is get some pictures out for us. I always refer to these so often. And this one should give us the idea. We use it so often, but the mind controls then the physical nature, and of course the higher part of the mind. Well, you know, we could do this in two ways. We could say that the mind aspect of the soul controls the physical nature, the love aspect of the soul, the emotional nature, and the will aspect of the soul, the mental nature. But from another point of view, we can look at the superimposition of the triad in this way, that the higher mind ends up controlling the physical nature, etheric-physical nature. The Buddhic qualities of the triad control the astral nature, and the will aspect, at least this is the origin of the will aspect for the soul, controls the mental nature. So the lower triad, consisting of the three aspects of the atomic triangle, is controlled both by the soul and ultimately by the spiritual triad, and in a way ultimately by the monad itself. So if we study this triplicity with care, we shall see that the process outlined brings the higher aspect of the personal self, the mind. So the mind results in inspiration. We shall see it brings the soul into conscious control of the astral, and maybe he's connecting here imagination with this, and we'll call this inspiration here. And the will aspect, the highest aspect of divinity, whether working through the soul or through the triad, into control of the mind, and we will call this illumination. Of course, these words have to mean something to us. We have to know when we are truly illumined, when light is really appearing in the mental nature and within the consciousness, and what that experience of light is like. You know, is it an aha, oh, I see, I see something that I did not see before? Oftentimes it's expressed in terms of sight. We have to know when the relationship between imagination and love, is there a way that we can, that somehow the access to the energy of love evokes the imagination in such a way that all that is unified by love is revealed in its relationships? Is there a way that by using the imagination we can evoke love? That's the other way around. We are told sometimes that the mind controls the etheric body and inspires it or animates it. Is there a way that our thoughts can bring physical inspiration, vitality to the physical life? By thinking certain thoughts, will we be more vitalized in our expression in the world? And looking the other way around, will our vital expression in the lower worlds somehow stimulate thoughts which are illuminative and energizing? Is there a positive feedback loop between the mind and the vital physical nature? Perhaps there is, and let's just say we have to make real experiences of these interconnections. All right. There are, therefore, two thoughts which we will have in our minds as we study this technique of fusion. First, that it is a threefold technique and is colored by and conditioned by the qualities of the first, second, and third ray. Okay, it's not a sevenfold technique. Notice, however, that the mergings with the angel of the presence were, in fact, or at least represented a sevenfold technique. Now that is interesting, because that's already occurring at a rather high point in evolution. It's the third degree, when the angel and the man, the candidate, the aspirant, the dweller, when they merge, it is that. So that is a quite a high process, and it is sevenfold. Maybe even a higher process, in a sense, than this threefold technique could be. Okay, now secondly, that this technique of whichever these three natures it may be, will be of such a kind that it will produce illumination through the evocation of the will. Now this immediately reminds one of Shambhala and the unfettered enlightenment of Shambhala, and of the Leonian will to illumine. So it is this, the will produces the light, I suppose a reflection of the light of life itself. It is right here that esotericists will recognize the importance of the teaching in connection with the center at the base of the spine. Okay, the rising kundalini will bring illumination to the entire system. It is awakened by an act of the will from the ajna center in connection with the divine purpose, but the ajna center is the directing, and in this case imaginative manipulating center. The ajna center is the directing, imaginative, manipulative center, which really means by the mind functioning forcefully under the influence of the spiritual man through the medium of the brain. This is what the act of the will means. This is an act of will. So the Kundalini will bring great illumination. Vulcan is involved, Pluto is involved, Pluto bringing everything to light, up into the light of day, Vulcan being a representative of the unfettered enlightenment and is the power of purpose behind the willfully directing mind, which manipulates through imagination the uprising of the Kundalini, and the brain is used. So, we have here a first and a second. First, it's a threefold technique, and it will bring about illumination through the evocation of the will. So, let's just say that as the will aspect strengthens within us, so will the light. Okay. So will the light. It infers also that this technique will so stimulate the faculty of imagination that an ever-expanding or an all-inclusive love will increasingly be expressed. Let's just say the imagination will evoke love, and vice versa, I believe. And therefore that the heart center will be forcefully affected and awakened into full activity. The soul, well, the heart is the soul, DK has said, and the egoic lotus is, in a way, the heart center of the monad. So the fusion will so stimulate the faculty of imagination that an ever-expanding, now here we have, astrologically considered, we have Jupiter and its relation to vision. An ever-expanding or an all-inclusive love, that's Jupiter, will increasingly be expressed. All-inclusive and unconditional love, not dependent upon likes and dislikes, or upon affinity. Being transcends affinity. So we all share the fact that we are instead of are not. We have this one thing in common, and it is being, regardless of the qualities of being which we express, which result in time and space in affinity or disaffinity. So imagination will be keyed to the expanding love. I want to put that down. Imagination is keyed to the expansion of love. So the heart center will be forcefully affected, and the base of the spine, as we have said earlier, but it's hard to believe that the center at the top of the head would not be involved. It infers also that the spiritual plane life of the disciple, as it expresses itself in the environment, will become inspired and creative. There's the third ray. DK says he prefers the name, the ray of creative intelligence. He prefers that name for the third ray. So it also infers that the spiritual plane life of the disciple, of course, is that the atmic plane, because sometimes the atmic plane is called the spiritual plane, as it expresses itself in the environment, will become inspired, capable of taking in divinity with each breath. That is inspiration, breathing in the fire, breathing in deity, not cut off, not depressed, not ineffective, but constantly animated by the fire of divinity. You can put that down. So, animated by the fire of divinity, and creative through the full and conscious use of the intelligence. So, creative, inspired creative intelligence, the imaginative, loving vision of the unity of all life, and then, of course, the great illumination, which comes from the unfettered enlightenment of Shambhala. So this technique will bring these factors, illumination, imagination, and inspiration, as representatives of the will, the soul, or the Buddhic faculty, and the mind, into expression. This, in its turn, brings about the rounded out activity of the throat center. It's going to represent the higher powers rather than any material forces, and thus the three major centers which are aroused into activity upon the path of discipleship are brought to full and measured controlled activity. Now, so far it looks like we have the base of spine center, the heart center, and the throat center. It does appear the head center is not particularly connected, but it does seem to be related. Base of spine acting in conjunction with the head center, I would say. Purpose at the head center and will at the base of the spine, though not so much mentioned except through the medium of the brain, which is controlled by the head center. Love and imagination, and intelligence and inspiration. Upon the path of initiation, the awakening and full conditioned functioning, they're still conditioned, still limited and conditioned, of the two head centers is completed. And this is the result of the use of the technique of duality by the... So here we have, I think he's going to say, the crown center, and the ajna center. Okay, and this is going to be a fusion of these two. Let's see, we have 1072, and to that we will add 1172, 1170, 1168. It depends on how we count it. We're going to add either 96 petals to the 972. That's it. 972 plus 100 is 1072, minus 4 is 1068. 1068. Okay. Well, these will come together, or maybe 1070, if we count the two petals again, the two great petals, which have within them another 96 petals. All right, so the coming together of the soul and personality, let's just say the soul represented by the head center and the personality represented by the ajna center, or atma represented by the head center and buddhi represented by the ajna center, or the monad represented by the head center and the spiritual triad as a whole represented by the ajna center. So these are the technical processes behind the technique of duality, the coming together of the two head centers, and that is completed. And we see, of course, this must occur after the third initiation. And I think if we turned to a treatise on cosmic fire, we looked at page 170 or so, we would see that spiritual man to the fifth initiation is concerned with the heart, the 7 head centers, and the 2 many-petaled lotuses, presumably here the 1,000-petaled lotus and the ajna. So we're definitely dealing with spiritual man to the fifth initiation when dealing with the technique of duality. This is refers to spiritual man to the fifth initiation, and TCF 170 or so. Or is it 171? 170. It is that. One head center, the 1,000-petaled lotus, represents the spirit or the life aspect, and the other, the ajna center, represents the matter or form aspect. Well, personality can be matter form. How did I put it there earlier? Well, the spiritual triad can be matter form, or from another perspective, the soul compared to the triad can be matter form, because it is the vehicle of the triadal energies. So one head center, the 1,000-petaled lotus, represents matter or the form aspect. The spirit aspect, the other ajna center, represents matter or the form aspect. Thus the work carried forward upon the paths of evolution, of probation, and of discipleship is completed in the path of initiation. So we have really 4 paths, and what we begin to tread from the time of individualization is the path of evolution. It may not be conscious evolution for us, but it is happening. And a long time passes, a long time, millions of years before the path of probation, being tested out in the light of the soul, we can call this path of probation, being tested or proved in the light of the soul. Okay. That's the law of the soul. Well, I know how to do it. That's it, light of the soul. Thus the work carried forward upon the paths of evolution, of probation, and of discipleship is completed in the path of initiation, and thus, when the rays are understood, you have the possibility of a new system of awakening the centers or chakras. This is quite an important hint, because once we understand which particular rays govern which chakras, and which particular chakras may be emphasized in our life because of the rays we have, we will have a way of meditatively applying that knowledge to the further opening up of the chakras, into allowing us into new dimensions of consciousness and new types of energy reception. But this system concerns only the awakening of the center or lotus of force, the central part of the center or lotus of force. That's the jewel. Well, let's just say that every chakra has its jewel, right? All right. The teaching given in the Oriental and Theosophical books refers primarily to the awakening and right relation of the centers when the aspirant is upon the probationary path. The awakening and right relation of the centers. Okay. The teaching which I have here given has not before been so explicitly made public, and has hitherto been only communicated orally. So, a new revelation in process. One half of the center, the outer half, therefore, one half of the lotus petals, is brought into increased activity upon the probationary path, and the other half begins its intensified vibratory activity upon the path of discipleship. Now, there are in this world period an even number of petals in each chakra. So we can speak of halves. But the intensification of the center of the lotus though the one life controls both soul and body, only takes place when the two later techniques of fusion and of duality are carried successfully forward. So we are speaking of the stimulation of the jewel in each lotus, following upon the stimulation of two halves of the lotus on the path of aspiration and the path of discipleship. Right, path of aspiration, one part or half of the lotus petal stimulated, path of discipleship, the other half, however he divides these halves, and that would be interesting to understand. Are they, considering the mostly vertical nature of the chakras, are they the petals above, closer to the upper part of the body compared to the petals below? Is it that way? We don't know. It's just a hint given. But now, let's just say the technique of fusion has to do with synthesis, and even more so does the technique of duality have to do with synthesis. So the jewel, which is the representative of synthesis, is stimulated. And I suppose this will have to do with the atomic subplane as well, since the will comes through that particularly. It has to do with the number one, making of two, one. the making of two one, or the making, the making of two into one. So how does this work out? Soul and personality fused into one. Spirit or matter and spirit fused into one, or monad, or let's see, soul infused personality and monad fused into one. That's how it will work. Of course, we need the experience of the functioning of these techniques. We cannot let this material remain academic in nature. There's some material given by the Tibetan which cannot help for us but remain academic because it is so far advanced in relation to our present stage of unfoldment. But this material, I think, the techniques of integration and for some of these, the techniques of fusion can be applied. And in our esoteric psychology courses, we attempted at least to move towards application. Certain questions therefore arise. What are the techniques producing fusion upon the three major rays and, pretty much soul, personality fusion? How do these techniques bring about illumination of the mind? So we see right away that the stage of mental polarization is operative, or can be achieved through the techniques of fusion. Thus, these techniques will, that's technicalities, will be applicable between the second and third initiations. How do these techniques bring about imaginative capacity of the sentient body? How do these techniques bring about an inspired life? And it seems to, all types will have all three, but in different measure, as I think he will explain here. Illumination of the mind, imaginative capacity of the sentient body. I think we have to be very careful how we use our creative imagination. Under the influence of love, we will tend to use it in a certain way. Under the influence of desire, which is more personal, we may use our imagination to bring us closer to the acquisition of that which the personality desires. And an inspired life, and fired, we might say. Active, vital, resilient. Let's see, elevated, not held down by physicality. Okay, so how do these techniques bring these about? Another point should here be made. Disciples upon the minor rays, likewise, upon the minor rays, i.e., those whose soul ray is one of the rays of attribute, rays of aspect, attribute, likewise employ one or other of these three major techniques. Fourth ray disciples employ the second ray technique, and that's pretty clear about why they should, as do sixth ray disciples. And let us remember the method of ray resolution. Fourth and sixth ray disciples do resolve upon the second ray, but also upon the third ray. But anyway, the second ray is a great attractive magnet for the transition of sixth and fourth ray souls or disciples. And we don't know the proportion there. We don't know the number of fourth and sixth ray souls that resolve upon the third ray compared to those that resolve upon the second. One could wonder whether the monadic ray doesn't somewhat control that resolution. Disciples upon the fifth ray employ the first ray technique. It is interesting to note that prior to the first initiation, the personalities of all aspirants to this great expansion of consciousness will be found upon the third ray, which, like the solar plexus center, is a great clearinghouse for energies, a great transmuting station, if I may so use the term. So he calls the first initiation a great expansion of consciousness. Probably it is. And here it seems that we are not talking about the third initiation as the first. So in fact, the third ray, relating to the sacral center quite a bit and to the throat center, will often be found upon the third ray. It says prior to the first initiation, but we would say how many lives prior? That is the question. Maybe for a series of lives running. I mean, sometimes the personality ray does continue for a while. The personalities of all aspirants to this great expansion of consciousness will be found upon the third ray, which is like the solar plexus center, involved, interestingly, in the second initiation, a great clearinghouse for energies and a great transmuting station. So let's just say elevating the quality. The third ray elevating the quality of the energies which pass through the personality, raising them to be fit for the first initiation. Okay, so it seems, is it said about the seventh ray? Well, we're told of the fifth ray, fourth and sixth and seventh. I mean, fourth and sixth, but what about the seventh? What technique does the seventh ray disciple use? We think it must be the third technique, although we cannot be sure. It seems interesting the seventh ray may be formed by an equally balanced portion of the energy of all three rays. There is definitely a connection between the seventh and the first ray, and here we're told that the fifth ray uses the first ray technique. We're not told anything yet about the seventh ray. But there was one disciple who, as a seventh ray soul, was resolving upon the second ray in the soul nature. And we have the instance in which Master R took his initiates of the second, I think third degree, onto the third ray with him when he became the Mahachohan. So it seems that the seventh ray is related to all the rays, but so far in what he's described of the rays of attribute, we don't have any using the third ray technique. So disciples upon the minor rays likewise employ one or other of these three major techniques, and since the word three is used, there would have to be at least one ray which use the third ray technique, it seems to me. And of course, when you think about the idea of presented attributes, it's pretty clear that there is a strong connection between the third ray and the seventh. Seventh would be excellent at presenting attributes, taking the qualities of the higher worlds and expressing them in the lower. The highest and the lowest meet. Okay. Now, so now he's going to get into the important discussion of how the technique of fusion operates for the different ray types. So now we will go on and take a look at this first ray technique. The first ray technique must therefore do the following things and produce the following results. Note that he's not telling us yet what the technique is, right? Not yet telling us what the technique really is, but later he will. The divine will must be evoked, of which the mind aspect is the reflection. So we could almost say the mind is the reflection of the monad and of atma. And we do know that the ray of the monad does affect the ray of the lower mind, which is, I think, very interesting. And the brain, or phenomenal appearance, the shadow. The brain is the shadow of the divine will. It is, after all, the controlling, directing center within the physical body. So the divine will must be evoked, of which the mind aspect is the reflection, and the brain, or the phenomenal appearance, the shadow. And what would he say of the etheric brain? Would it also be part of the shadow? Perhaps. This brings into functional activity upon the physical plane what is called in theosophical books atma, or the first qualified differentiation of the monadic life. Roberto Saggioli has this diagram in which he shows the will coming forth from the center of life itself. It is the first expression of monadic life. We recall will, wisdom, and activity, and this quality is often called the spiritual will. The atmic plane is the spiritual plane, and this type of will coming from the monad is focused there. So in the first ray technique, the divine will must be evoked. That's number one. Let's see what the other requirements are and whether we can study them in relation to our own life, and see whether any of these things are really happening. Okay then, the divine will must be evoked. What else when using this first ray technique? Maybe I'll just outline this so it's easy to find. Later we may want to find it. It's not just working through what the Tibetan says, it's relating what we have worked through to what else may be said. The evocation of this will produces an illumination of the mind. And this is differing from the illumination achieved through ordinary meditation, and about which much has been written in the mystical books. One wonders, what about the St. Paul illumination? Blinding in its power. This latter illumination is essentially the evocation of the intuition, which brings the illumination of direct knowledge to the mind. But the one to which I here refer is, symbolically speaking, related to the state of consciousness of the Creator when he sent forth the phenomena producing fiat, let there be light. Now that's something to ponder on, really. It's not just the revelation of relationship. It is, I think, the impression of the light of life itself, or an aspect of that light. So, some impression of the light of life itself. Let there be light. It's almost the creation of light as matter. Well, we'll have to ponder on this one. It must be revealing that all matter is light, and the ability to see the light origin of all things. These thoughts occur to me. Can we look out on the world and not simply have revealed to us the light of relationship, which the intuition will do? It will show how all things are connected and all of their relationships within the field are understood. But what of the revelation through which we see that all things perceived are actually light? What of that? Well, we'll go on. It would be a Kabbalistic revelation. It would reveal to us that all perceivables came out of the light, came forth from the light, and are that very light. These are thoughts. So this evocation, the evocation of this will produces an illumination of the mind, to see all things in the lighted unity. Also, the homogeneity of the universe as light, maybe. And then this illumination comes from the highest aspect which man can conceive, follows the direct line of approach, or pours down through direct channel from. Okay. Now, is the highest, well, this highest aspect is in general the monad, but is the highest aspect of the monad involved or not? Because we'll see later that different aspects of the monad may be involved in this illumination. Anyway, it's the highest aspect which man can conceive. We'll see what that means in context with things said further on. It pours down from a direct channel, through a direct channel from the level of atma, or that center of spiritual will which is dynamic and effective, but seldom called into play, we might say, by the average disciple. Master D.K. is so fond of speaking of the average disciple to help us, I think, decentralize ourselves so we begin to think of ourselves as fairly average. You know, I often think to myself, well, these are maybe third-rate thoughts, but no matter what quantity of knowledge a man may have, or a solar logos may have, or a galactic logos may have, it's all, when compared to the infinity of infinities, what I call then an ultimate negligibility. All are equally negligible in the sight of infinitudinous infinity. I'm going to throw that in. Does it belong? I don't know. But it's something that comforts me at times. All quantities are equally negligible in the sight of or comparison with infinitudinous infinity, the infinity of all infinity. So it wouldn't make any difference. The entirety of the universe is of the same quantity as the tiniest mite when compared with the infinity of infinities. And this means that there's no use to struggle for accumulation excessively much, because it all amounts to just about nothing. Occasionally I deviate off under these thoughts, but all accumulation amounts to next to nothing. It doesn't make any difference whether it's the universe, a flea, or the tiniest ultimate particle event, all next to nothing. So this will is seldom called into play. It could be, if we willed or were willing by the average disciple. And I can say here that if only he were willing. It takes a while to become willing. Mostly we resist willingness. The Christ demonstrated for us the most profound state of willingness in the Garden of Gethsemane when he accepted upon himself such a burden for 5,000 years of bodhisattvic ministration to humanity. Okay, so it goes from the level of Atman out. It starts higher. We're going to try to find out, what is this higher start? This higher origin for this type of will. It goes to the will petals of the egoic lotus, which are, we might call them in some sense the petals of sacrificial love, upon which I touched in Treatise on Cosmic Fire. These petals are the reflection in the soul of this particular aspect of energy. The loving sacrifice of the soul, they're called sacrifice petals, and will, sacrifice, and love come together in these petals. Will, sacrifice, and love come together in these petals. Okay, these petals are the reflection in the soul. So what is that highest level? We'll have to see. From this layer of petals to the mind-body, and from the mind-body to the brain, and we assume the etheric brain will also be involved. From the brain in due and set time, when there is true readiness. So often that readiness is not understood by the disciple. He thinks he's ready when he's not. or when he truly is ready, he feels unready. So in our brain consciousness in these lower three worlds, we don't always have the greatest sense of timing. Our timing is not so accurate. From the brain in due and set time to the center of the base of the spine, there arousing the Kundalini fire, which presumably contributes to the revelation that all is light. So, what is this highest point that we can conceive? It is the monad, but what part of the monad? So, the origin is the monad, always the monad, but what point within the monad? That is the question. All right. It will interest students to note how the first-ray disciple, when employing this first-ray technique of fusion. Now, this is so interesting. I just thought of something. Isolated unity is what we will discuss as the first-ray. Oh, come on, first-ray technique. Every time I write the word fry, it's going to come out first ray. It kind of fits, doesn't it? Isolated unity is what we will discuss as the first ray technique, and this appears at the fifth initiation in what we would call fullness, and at that initiation, and this is the point, it is the base of the spine center which is aroused fully. So we can see pretty well how that fits together, doesn't it? The first ray technique produces a great illumination. The isolated unity is the first ray technique. It's especially applicable to the master, or the one becoming the master, who arouses the base of the spine center. That's the center which is of greatest focus and moment in that initiation. And this must bring a type of illumination, we might say the light body must be illuminated, the body of fire, as discussed in TCF. 166 to 169, somewhere in there. So the light is quite a different thing, and we have to see what part of the monad this is coming from. Anyway, the base of the spine is involved, but if the brain is involved, then the head center must also be involved as well, the highest head center. If the brain is physical brain, okay, what about brain? Just BR? No? Do we have that? Okay, BRN. Oh, BR. Oh, that's brethren. All right, let's try this. BR. And let's see if we can. And I think. No, that's Brahma. So I don't have a brain. Don't have a brain in my abbreviations here. Well, what will we do without a brain? We'll worry about that another time. So he ends up, the first ray disciple, in this first ray technique by producing a second ray characteristic of which illumination, producing understanding, love, and synthetic cooperation is the predominant note. Now we should not forget that it's not just illumination. We must note the secondary effects. So note these effects, understanding, love, and sympathetic cooperation, coming to the first ray soul who needs this very much. We remember in the techniques of integration, the light that shocked revealed all that had been destroyed, and the first ray soul tried to recover sensitivity or develop sensitivity and stood at the center with his arms outstretched in an attempted sentient relationship with the whole. So this illumination comes to him, but is accompanied by understanding, love, and sympathetic cooperation. Anybody who's on the first ray can try to cultivate this love. And these rules will be very helpful in that regard. Then the second ray disciple, through rightly applied technique, calls it inclusive reason, produces, curiously enough, strangely enough, let's just say, our planetary process is strange. Strange. Third ray, results of which the use of the creative imagination is the outstanding characteristic, arranging and rearranging forms. It's the arranging and rearranging. The arranging and rearranging is of the third ray. Moving things about and into new relationships. The third ray disciple, through the development of the power to inspire, adds to his qualities certain definitely first ray potencies, and this is the hint. What's going on here? Every point of the triangle through this fusion process adds to his innate qualities certain other needed qualities. So I've often thought that it's most difficult for the first ray type to develop love. It's most difficult for the second ray type to develop intelligence. And it's most difficult for the third ray type, by the power of exclusion, to develop the sacrificial will. And here, these difficulties are somewhat overcome, because the qualities needed are added. I'll say that. The qualities needed are added. For instance, if it is difficult for the first ray type to develop love, then in this technique of fusion, love is added to the innate qualities of the first ray type. Okay, and so it goes around the triangle. All are, however, subordinated to the second ray nature of the divine expression in the solar system. So this is by way of saying the technique of fusion for the second ray and creative imagination in general are added to all types. So creative imagination can be used in this solar system with profit. Okay. Well, this is really so interesting. You know, I'm recalling years of studying this material and trying to apply this to myself and have the students apply it to themselves. But, you know, it's not something just to be superficially imposed upon one's life process. One has to think very deeply about what one is passing through. And if we are at that point when fusion with the soul, the bringing together into true interactivity of all the 5 parts is really occurring, then these techniques will be useful. You know, sometimes when I'm doing these commentaries, I feel as if I'm working with inclusive reason, or at least trying to see all things in right relationship and with meticulous entirety. Meticulous entirety, a term we will learn a little bit more about later. At the same time, in my own life, I'm very interested in isolated unity. I work on it all the time, work towards it, towards the understanding. And in a way, how can one help but cooperate in presenting a certain type of attribute to the world? What will that attribute be? All of us who are involved in the externalization of the hierarchy and the reappearance of the Christ are presenting attributes from the spiritual and divine worlds into the 3 lower worlds. Maybe it will depend upon our ray type what the attributes presented will be, because, you know, we're told the Buddha presented wisdom, the Christ presented love, and the Plato presented the synthesis of ideas. Very interesting. How the rays work on higher turns of the spiral. And the new Terra test that my colleague Rick Good and I have completed now, more or less completed, should help the earnest inquirer to discover some of the rays which may be operative in the higher reaches of his energy system. Well, DK gives this synthetic statement that all these different processes are subordinated to the second ray process. It's the major one. Okay. So this sort of ring around a rosy technique, from the first point of the triangle to the second, from the second point to the third, from the third to the first, supplements innate qualities with needed qualities. So the movement from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 1, supplements innate qualities with needed qualities of a different ray. Okay. So that was, now let's review. We go from the highest point we can conceive, that's the monad, I suppose, through atma, through the sacrifice petals, the petals of sacrificial loving will, to the mental body, and from the mental body into the physical brain, and from the physical brain, or etheric physical brain, to the base of the spine center, thus arousing the kundalini, which brings everything into the state of great luminosity that we call the body of fire. But what is that point from the monad where this all begins? That's the question for us in relation to the first ray. He's epitomizing these methods now. The technique of fusion employed by the second ray disciple, and we know what that means. If you talk about a disciple, i.e., the disciple whose soul is upon the second ray, will produce the following results: increased sentient response to the world's soul and to the environment in which the disciple finds himself will increasingly be achieved. Now this is to be expected, wouldn't you say so? To be expected. Then from that point of sentient life, let the soul realize the consciousness of God. Let the word go forth, reverberating through the silence, naught is but me. It begins, let all the life be gathered to the center and enter thus into the heart of love divine. Then, from that point of sentient life, let the soul realize the consciousness of God in all things. It's a very Neptunian, when we talk about increased sentiency, we think of Neptune with its second ray monad. Second ray monad. So increased sensitivity, this we expect. Did we expect the first response in the divine will be invoked? Yes, well, we expected that. But then illumination is a second ray quality, although sometimes light as matter is said to be related to the third ray. I think both can be considered true. Okay, this is largely done, the increased sentiency is done through the cultivation of the creative imagination. How very important this is. So, if we wish to cultivate increased sentiency and love, the creative imagination is the method. This is one of the great building attributes of deity, the creative imagination, building attribute. We have to think of the second ray as the what's called form builder. But the third ray is involved in that building because it moves things around according to the magnetic pattern which is to be expressed. So things have to be moved about, to be brought into place, and then when the right place is found, it will fulfill the magnetic pattern or archetype which is related to the second ray. So it is brought about by the evocation of the love nature. That's so interesting that the creative imagination will increase when the love nature is evoked. And as earlier noted, brings in soul power in full tide. So the soul is an expression of the second aspect of divinity related to the second ray. So love, imagination, and love, imagination, and the full tide of soul power. In the world of phenomenal appearance, the soul is the creating agent, the one who brings about manifestation, right? The one who brings about manifestation, the major building factor, the constructor of the forms. I at the point sustain, I at the point attract, I at the point direct and choose and dominate. I at the point am the builder. The major building factor, and whatever we seem to be here in the outer worlds, it's all been built by our own nature as a soul with the substanding cooperation of the presence of the solar angel. Although, interestingly enough, back in the earlier solar system, now, was there reincarnation? I mean, it seems to be a cyclic law. There was no solar angel to do the building. Then were the powers of the ego or the monad through the ego sufficient to do the building? Maybe that's the case. So this fusion technique will produce the results of increased sentient response, and this will arise through the cultivation of the creative imagination, which is stimulated by the evocation of the love nature, which, as DK might tell us, arises through life experience, but also through careful meditation upon the qualities of love. So the evocation of the love nature, and as earlier noted, brings in soul power in full tide. In the world of phenomenal appearance, the soul is the creative agent, the major building factor, the constructor of forms, and through the technique of fusion, the power to imagine or to use imaginative thought power in conjunction with the faculty to visualize, to wish, to dream into being is definitely scientifically developed. Well, we have only to look at Tibet. We see the tremendous training in the creative imagination. So let's just say that Tibetan Buddhism is largely a second-ray expression. And look at the training in visualization of the Tibetan monks and the tremendous detail through which they pass, or the tremendous detail which they are capable of holding in the imagination. Look at some of those mandalas, the intricacy of them, and all of that is somehow sustained in the mind's eye. So, the cultivation of the creative imagination, which under the impress of the intuition will help us see the relationship of things as they are in the archetypal world, and will help us see the way of coming into alignment with those subjective relationships. And when something needs to be corrected or rearranged, the energies can be moved about through the power of the creative imagination. When conditions in the lower worlds have to be reconditioned or rearranged, then the creative imagination can manipulate forms and conjuries of energies and forces, so that a more archetypal relationship results. Well, we all use our creative imagination, I'm sure. And sometimes we simply spontaneously imagine without being very creative about it at all. It's just whatever comes to mind. But we have to learn how deliberately, under the impression of soul love, to see things as they should be. See things as they should be, archetypally should. Okay. This creative attention, or one-pointed focus of the imaginative dreaming, because imagination has to be swung with the power to dream and to desire, the faculty of to visualize, to wish, to dream into being. If only this existed, right? We often say. See. If only this, that, or the other existed, and we dream it into being. We think about how life could be compared to how it is, and we use our imagination to foresee new relationships which eventually could materialize, in fact, if sustained, will materialize at some time or other. So, this creative tension, or one-pointed focus of imaginative dreaming, one-pointed focus of imaginative dreaming, in other words, not letting the imagination run wild or be impelled by uncontrolled streams of energy, but directing it with the mind, directing the creative imagination with the mind, which represents the will. It swings the astral body into complete subordination to the soul. This is interesting because if the normal out-picturing of desire is controlled, if the normal out-picturing of desire is controlled, then, let's just say, love will control the astral body. This fact is hinted at in the Bhagavad Gita, where, upon the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Arjuna suddenly sees the form of God. I am the form in which all forms are merged. Sees the form of God when all forms constitute one form. This is in the ancient Atlantean stanza, I am the form in which all forms are merged. It's a very inspiring thought. I am the great form, the one form. I am the one form in which all forms are merged. So suddenly, through the creative imagination, unity appears, pervaded by the cohesive energy of love. DK defines love in a number of ways, and he veers away from the sentimental definition towards more technical definitions, the power to draw into oneself, to identify. The battle is then over. Interestingly, we have so many of the stanzas connected with the sixth ray, where the battle now is over. The warfare is no more. He ceases from the battle, turmoil or conflict and the fight, and finds his way into the presence. The battle is then over. The soul is in complete control, and no sense of separativeness is again possible, because through the creative imagination, all forms are seen as constituting one form. So the visualization of all things as one is very useful. And I suppose, he will say this is in a way a third ray effect. Because after all, it is the creative imagination. When we say create, we mean to arrange into new combinations. There is no creativity without movement, I would say. So creativity requires movement. And then, what do we have so far? It will produce the following results when this technique of fusion, which is inclusive reason, is used by the second-ray disciple, increased sentient response to the world soul, sensitivity. The cultivation of the creative imagination, which is evoked by love, and love evoked by the right use of the creative imagination. And this imagination can be used to see the great unity. It can reveal the unity of all things. This is not the identicality of all things, it's the unity of all things. So, the creative imagination reveals the unity of all things, but unity is not isolated unity. Not isolated unity. Interestingly. Because isolated unity is related to synthesis and to homogeneity. sameness. Now the channel through which this synthesizing and creative energy pours down is as follows. From the monad to the love petals of the egoic lotus, and notice the triad is not mentioned, but we know that Buddhi feeds the love petals of the egoic lotus. So maybe on the way Buddhi is involved. From these love petals to the astral vehicle, energizing the astral matter, all astral matter found in the equipment of the phenomenal man. So the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. This is very interesting because the monad is the Spirit of God. Allow me to do this. S-P-O-G. And we'll call it this. Spirit of God. The Spirit of God moved upon the astral waters, and the monad is the Spirit of God, and from the astral waters comes the outpicturing we call imagination. Okay. Then from thence to the solar plexus center, assuming the solar plexus of the astral vehicle is also involved, and from that center to the heart center. You kind of wonder, the Kundalini rose also, did it not? The Kundalini rose and arose towards the head center. No, head center. And here we have the rising from solar plexus to the heart center. The needed duality connected with the astral body thus appears. Well, always this is the plane whereon the dual forces may be found. It's in Rule 7 of White Magic. We have here also a correspondence to the descent of the fire of the will to the base of the spine. Well, he's saying exactly what I said. With its subsequent raising along the spinal column to the head. So the analogy is clear. Okay. From the monad to the love petals of the egoic lotus, maybe taking in the Buddhi, because after all we did take in the Atma, didn't we? From the love petals to the astral vehicle, and there's a definite connection, just as Buddhi, well, we can see it really, just as Buddhi strengthens these love petals, here we see that, so the love petals are connected to the solar plexus. And interesting, though, here, how the solar plexus of a higher plane is superior to the heart center of a lower plane, and thence to another solar plexus, and so forth. But anyway, from the Buddhi comes all that stimulates the solar plexus, and what is stimulating the Buddhi but the wisdom aspect of the monad anyway? And what is stimulating the atmic sphere but the highest or will aspect? But we'll see. We'll see what the Tibetan says, because I think he's going to say something surprising. The third ray disciple, okay, do we have that sufficiently for the second ray disciple? Increased sensitivity to the world soul and to the environment, and let's just say sensitivity to the soul in all things. Oh, yes. Okay. Okay, so we have this sentiency using inclusive reason. We'll talk about the meaning of these terms. They're very important. And naturally, as the secondary soul fuses with this instrument, increasing sensitivity to the soul in all things would emerge, to the psychological state in all things, to the qualities of energy, and also to the identity of all things within the soul. And this sentiency is brought about through the creative imagination, which is evoked by increasing love. And there is a creative tension, which is the same as the one-pointed imaginative dreaming, and it leads to results, because the unity is seen. Okay, I want to put this in. The unity is seen from a state of creative tension, or one-pointed imaginative dreaming. Okay. So there is no longer a conflict between opposites, and we move from the monad, and probably, I would say, from the wisdom aspect of the monad, which is the second aspect of divinity, and literally divinity. The monad is divinity. And then to the love petals and the astral body. Then the solar plexus, but back to the heart. And it is important that the energy does rise again. The descending energy rises again. I think we could see that connection when we studied the triangles arising from the triangle of the super constellations, Great Bear, Sirius, and the Pleiades. They led down through many transformations into the depths of the human being, but always there was a rising again after the lower of two chakras had been reached. At least that was implied. The third ray disciple, employing the technique of fusion, finds that it evokes a full functioning of the divine creative faculty, and we would say, again, this we expect. It will be apparent at this point how important is motive, for it determines the line of activity or creativity. Let's just say that not all creativity is necessarily good, and differentiates man's activity into what is called by esotericists black and white magic. It is interesting to note that it is the very rare man indeed who swings into the field of so-called black magic. Maybe DK has a better name for it. This indicates, does it not, my brother, the extraordinarily triumphant work of the Great White Lodge. That great defending wall is really helping many and preventing them from taking ultimate steps which would lead over time to their destruction in our solar system. The fiat which initiated this creative activity, as far as it relates to man, has been inadequately couched in the words, "Let the earth bring forth abundantly." So, what do we have here? Many forms created to represent the spirit, thus inaugurating the age of creativity. Maybe the Aquarian age will be that, but maybe he means something more by that. The fiat, and this is a willful, an irresistible, let's get that, irresistible, willful statement or proclamation by deity. So the fiat which initiated this creative activity, as far as it relates to man, has been inadequately couched in the words, "Let the earth bring forth abundantly, that let there be a multiplicity of forms which represent the creative power of deity." This creative fecundity has steadily shifted during the past few thousand years into the creation of those effects of which ideas are the cause, producing within the creative range of man's mind what? That which is useful, and so contributing to man's present civilization. Whenever we think of usefulness, utilitarian qualities, think of the third ray and the fifth ray. And so contributing to man's present civilization, that which is beautiful, thus gradually developing the aesthetic consciousness, the sense of color, and the recognition of the use of symbolic forms in order to express quality and meaning. So the useful is along the 1, 3, 5, 7 line, and the beautiful, as we will expect, along the 2, 4, 6 line. And how about a 2? Okay. As a result of the disciples' use of this technique, there is brought about an increased vital livingness. Presented attributes. It's almost as if we bring quality to the world, we live. If we bring quality to the world, we live vibrantly. As we are in the throes of purpose, bringing through what has to be manifested, some energy grips us and keeps us going. It's paralleled in the life of the creative artist to when in the grips of his creativity can work all night, all day, all night, all day. Very little rest, some energy driving. And of course, when the creation is completed, the collapse, the well-earned collapse comes. So an increased vital livingness, and maybe this is what is meant by inspiration, and a dynamic inflow of spiritual life into the physical plane experience. Now, those are dynamic is a word suggesting the spirit. The disciple becomes inspired by the fire of love, and this evokes the service of creation as an expression of love. Is the monad here considered the fire of love? Oh, as forces of light. The fire of love? Let's see. So an increased vital livingness. It's definitely related to the first aspect of divinity. When the disciple presents attributes, the first aspect of divinity is stimulated. When okay, I've got to get this back here. So we'll say, when the third ray disciple, which we call it, presents attributes, spiritual attributes, or spiritual or divine attributes, the first aspect of divinity is aroused and expresses through him as vital livingness. So what do we have here? We have three things, really. Three powers expressed through the creative disciple. Vital livingness, the fire of love, and the service of creation. All of these powers representing the first, second, and third ray appear. All right. The power which inspires him and which makes him dynamic and creative in his environment comes likewise from the will aspect of the monad. Now, is every aspect a will aspect? We have to ask that. Is every aspect of the monad a will aspect? Or do we mean the very highest aspect of the monad? Will, wisdom, and activity. So it's almost, if this is true, if this is really the will aspect of the monad, because after all, when we look at there it is, the will aspect of the monad, not just the activity aspect. So you kind of wonder, don't you, whether we have the very highest aspect of the monad involved and maybe the third aspect of the monad involved in the creation of illumination. Is that possible? Sweeping the higher mind, the manas of the spiritual triad, right? Manas of the spiritual triad into activity upon the higher mental level, which is that on which the creative ideas of God emerge. That on which, now it doesn't say they're born there, they emerge in form, to be recognized by the human consciousness. So the plane of the spiritual triad is still formal, and the ideas emerge in form on that level. Well, if you look at the map, you'll see that the activity aspect of the monad, which is maybe the will to be active, is definitely connected with the monastic permanent atom. So that's the question. In some sense, it would seem it would. Okay. It would seem that the will aspect, or the highest aspect of the monad, should relate to the first ray technique. That the wisdom aspect, how should we do this? Wisdom aspect of the monad should relate to the second ray technique, and that the third aspect of the monad should relate to the third ray technique. It seems that way. And there are some things to point in that direction. Because he says the highest we can conceive. I mean, where does it come from? The logoic plane? When we talk about the line of energy, he doesn't even mention the monad, but he talks about the highest we can conceive, and he mentions the monad in the two other cases. Well, he talks about directly the will aspect of the monad, but, when you really think about it, the will aspect of the monad does pass through the activity aspect of the monad, the will to be active, the will to be wise, the will to be or the will to will, and from the activity aspect possibly to the monastic permanent atom, and then into other aspects of the personality, which we'll probably look at right here. The channel of approach or of downflow is as follows. Well, it's the will aspect of the monad, monadic life. it seems very clear that that's what he means. The will aspect of monadic life, the highest aspect, to that level of consciousness and of energy which we call the higher mind. But when we look at the chart, the will aspect of monadic life goes to the atmic, permanent atom. And then we could say to the monastic permanent atom, as all aspects of the triad are connected with each other. Well, let there be light, that the earth bring forth abundantly. Both of these are willful statements from the level of the monad, from the higher mind to the knowledge petals of the egoic lotus, and from these vortices of force, which do control eventually much within the personality, to the lower or concrete mind, that in which the average intelligent man familiarly works, and we might say occasionally, otherwise, to the throat center, and from thence immediately to the sacral center, the center of physical plane creation or reproduction, and from there it is raised again to the throat center. Now, when it comes to the triangle, the three great constellations and their movement through three zodiacal constellations and three planets and into our planet via Shambhala and hierarchy and humanity, we have a difference in the third ray line of descent. It's to the ajna center and thence to the throat center. It doesn't include the sacral center as this one does. But then maybe here we're dealing with a slightly lower process than the one which involves the three great constellations. So from there it is raised again to the throat center, where the creative physical urge is transmuted into artistic or literary creation in some form or another, and later still into the power to create groups and organizations. It's a big hint. And of course it does seem to involve the seventh ray, because the seventh ray is a group creating, organization creating ray, so it seems to be a reason why the seventh ray would be related particularly to the third ray method. These groups or organizations which will express some idea or some thought which emanates from the mind of God and which demands immediate precipitation on earth. And the mind of God, are we dealing with the activity aspect of the monad, or simply with atma, or are we dealing with the triad? Well, the mind of God, of course. Really, we'd have to go to the cosmic mental plane to find the mind of God. We can find lower expressions. All right, let's see if there's any. Yes, it's going to tell us how the result of this inflow of supremely high energies. So if the word supreme is used, it's about as high as we can get, right? So the will aspect of the monad is hinted, again, is that the processes set in motion by the technique of integration. Oh, well, maybe this is a summary. This may be a summary of it all. Okay. So let's go back a little bit and look at the third ray methods. It will produce the full functioning of the divine creative faculty. So the power to create form, to manifest form, is present. So the third ray disciple will find that it evokes a full functioning of the creative activity, and he will find the fiat which initiated this creative activity is expressed to us in "let the earth bring forth abundantly." So there is a fecundity of mind, I suppose, and we are creating now in response to ideas. And we create that which is useful and that which is beautiful. And the third-rate disciple will find, as a result of this technique, an increasing vital livingness and dynamic inflow of spiritual life into the physical plane experience. But he will also be inspired by the fire of love, and he will experience the evocation of the service of creation. Remember that the law of service of the soul is the third law, and is ruled by the sixth ray. So service and creativity are related. And here's the service of creation. Goodwill is love in action, the blending of the second and third rays. And then further, the power which inspires him comes from the will aspect of the monad. It's hard to escape that one, even though I would like that. See, because the monad itself is the will aspect. So now we are differentiating within the monad, aren't we? So it's not just that it comes from the monad, it comes from a specific aspect, and we're only given will, wisdom, and activity, and will is the highest. So there we have the very highest aspect of the monad, apparently, stimulating and inspiring, so that heaven reaches to earth. This is a final kind of alignment in a way. The very highest is involved. Now, when he talks about the highest we can conceive for the first ray, maybe, who knows, it could be something related to the escape of the monadic essence. We'll have to take a look at that. So the will aspect of the monad, higher mind, in which the ideas emerge in form, and then from the will aspect to the higher mind involves the triad again, interestingly enough, and from these vortices to the concrete mind, and from there to the throat center, sacral center, and back again. All right. So, when you look at this, you want to know where the inspiration comes for the very first ray expression. If the will aspect is already taken, as it were, does it in some way come from the logoic plane? Or does it come from the activity aspect of the monad? Which could relate it, of course, to mental illumination, because illumination is produced. It's said to be a second ray activity, but it's an illumination which shows that all, at least as I see it, that all creation is light. And if that were the case, then the activity or the creative aspect of the monad could easily be involved. I think there's no question that the wisdom aspect of the monad is involved when it comes to the second ray technique. All right, I think we have a little more we can do. The results of this inflow of supremely high energies, and let's just say, in general, from the monad, is that the processes set in motion by the techniques of integration are completed. Well, there it is. It is an overlapping process. Let's just say the techniques of integration and the techniques of fusion do overlap. And the rays of the lower man are welded or fused into the personality ray. Sometimes you wonder, well, why, when he discusses the planet, doesn't he discuss the three lesser rays? It's perhaps because they are indeed welded or fused into the personality ray. And whenever we're talking about welding and fusing, we have the power of Vulcan welding and fusing under great heat. This itself is later blended with the egoic ray, enabling that spiritual identity which we recognize as standing behind phenomenal man to work through both these rays. That spiritual identity, right, and this is, we might say, this is the monad, thus bringing about a correspondence to that grouping within the divine expression which we call the major and minor rays. So the minor rays, we could say, have to do with the rays of personality, and the major rays maybe with the ray of the ego. The rays of the triple lower nature then form one single avenue, and we would say, thus the four, which are the one, through which the soul and later the energy of spirit can contact the larger whole in manifestation upon the physical, astral, and mental planes. So spirit eventually, right? No, let's get that spelled right. Spirit comes through eventually. What the techniques of integration and fusion have done, when they have done their intended work, this spiritual identity can work in service of humanity. This spiritual identity, which really the monad, can work in service to humanity and in cooperation with the plan in the three worlds of human endeavor and in the 5 states of consciousness, human and superhuman. So it is definitely, we see that we are speaking of the monad, definitely. This brings the disciple to the period wherein the third initiation can be taken. Then, still higher forces can be brought into play, and the technique of duality can be considered, mastered, and used. So we can relate the technique of duality to the third initiation and to the angel of the presence stanzas. It would be obvious to you that I cannot give you the rules of this technique, that is the technique of duality, as they constitute part of the veiled secrets of initiation. Though duality is emphasized, it is the duality which produces simplification, and not division, merging and synthesis. So all opposites seen as merged in the underlying synthesis. Man is then viewed as a duality of spirit and matter, and not as the well-known triplicity of spirit, soul, and body. So it's a higher perspective altogether. Well, I think we are reaching the point where we can move on to the next program. But this is in general a statement about the techniques of fusion. They are supremely high energies. They are monadic energies. The fusion is, in a way, caused by these monadic energies, though, of course, the angel of the presence is assisting. So the three are merged together and become the four, which is the one. So let's put it like this. The three become the four, which is the one. This itself is later blended with the egoic ray, so the two, enabling that spiritual identity which we recognize as standing behind the phenomenal man to work with both these, through both these rays. And presumably this is the monad. So thus bringing about a correspondence to that grouping which the divine expression within the divine expression, which we call the major and minor rays. So that we have then the rays of attribute related to the personality, and the rays of aspect related to the triple soul, because the soul is the triangle, in a way. We can see that. And souls are called the triangles. The rays of the triple lower nature then form one single avenue through which the soul and later the energy of spirit can contact the larger whole. So, what we have here, we have an interesting thing, and I talked about this earlier in the previous program. The ray of the personality, is also used by the monad. However, we might, it's either the natural ray of the personality or it is the Maya-varupically generated ray of the personality. And when the techniques of integration and fusion have done their intended work, this spiritual identity can work in service to humanity and in cooperation with the plan. Really, when we talk about identity, it is the monad. It is the core of our identity. It may manifest as what we call the soul, but the soul is not our real identity because it disappears and our identity remains. And for the personality, we say the same. So when the techniques of integration and fusion have done their intended work, the spiritual identity can work in service to humanity and in cooperation with the plan in the three worlds of human endeavor and in the 5 states of consciousness. So definitely it is the monad, because what we call the soul does not work in the 5 states of consciousness. Only if the spiritual identity is the monad, it can work in the 5 states of consciousness. This brings the disciples to the period wherein the third initiation can be taken. And you kind of wonder, it flashes on me. Is the technique of duality given in the Angel of the Presence stanzas? Maybe yes. Sometimes DK supplies us with things, and it's up to us to recognize that he has done so. And it's all about the merging of the two, and the particular chakras involved in the merging of the two. So maybe he's given it to us and we don't even know he has. Anyway, we certainly must study the Angel of the Presence stanzas to see about how that merging of the higher self and the dweller can occur. So he says he cannot give us the rules of this technique, but let's study the Angel of the Presence stanzas, because they do exemplify the methods by which the third initiation is achieved. Maybe the technique of duality leads beyond the third as well. Maybe. Leads beyond the third initiation. All the way to re-becoming the monad. Maybe. Maybe that's the ultimate moment, at least as far as man is concerned, of antichironic retraction. Maybe even mastership is not the full retraction, because there's got to be some kind of line that connects the master on the atmic plane with the monad, with the chohan on the monadic plane. Well, anyway, this will be, for us, the end of Techniques of Fusion and Duality, number 2, and we're in EP 2, and we're on some page or other. He's going to offer us page 391. So we're stopping at a good time, because he's going to now deal with those techniques and their names. We've hinted at them, talked about them a little bit, but now he will do that. Beginning of Technique of Fusion and Duality, number 3, EP2, page 391. This will not be a long series of programs, but we'll touch the depths and the heights, and continue. Let's see, the process. This is our completed. Okay. And I want to make that quite big because it's something I know I'll be looking for, and I've been hinting all the time that there's a continuity between the techniques of integration and the technique of fusion, and that fusion is really a continuation of that fivefold relationship brought about by integration, not just a fourfold relationship, but fivefold, and a deepening of that field, and a fusion into really a becoming of one thing. And the monad is definitely involved. Okay, friends, that will be all we're going to do for right now. We're a tiny bit over, not much, and we will see you for a discussion of the techniques themselves, requiring very profound thought because they are advanced forms of meditation. When you take those words into meditation, you have definitely an advanced form of meditation. So we'll see you soon, probably tomorrow for me, and see you soon.